Um, Welcome everybody. How are you doing today? It's so very nice to have you here. And today I wanted to speak a little bit about the true meaning of what we really want is to be here. Because, you have heard me say this before, what we really want is to be here. And that is the truest, the deepest desire that we really have. And of course, that desire doesn't always show up in our personality or in the sense of I or in the mind. And yet, if you were to examine, every time you wish for something, you want this, you want that, obviously, that's usually most of the time we want something to be different than it is, right? But every time we would examine that really, really deeply, step by step, you would realize that ultimately what you are longing for is just a moment of presence. It's just a moment of peace. It's just a moment of being here. And the mind can show up in very obvious ways, right? There's many ways in which we already recognize the mind. However, the mind can also show up in very subtle ways. And here is where we have a lot of habit, right? We don't always recognize these subtle ways of the mind. And mind, I, one and the same thing. And thought, right? Mind, I, thought, one and the same thing. So we don't always recognize these very subtle ways, of the mind, right? We habitually follow that. And that's, of course, what causes suffering, right? Because then we follow that. We believe it's true. We believe those desires, those thoughts, those wishes for something. We believe that that's true, right? Rather than knowing what actually directly arises in presence. And I want to share something with you from my own practice. But before I go there, also when the nervous system is in reactivity, when the nervous system and brain are in reactivity, of course, we are more likely to rely on thinking as well. Even physiologically, when there's fight, flight, freeze, overwhelm, collapse, the energy would move more into thinking, right? And when it does move, and also from, our reliance on the mind, right? We also have a habit of going into the mind, when challenges are here, when it's, when it's difficult to be here. And that, of course, is always true, that what we really want is to be here. However, it is even more so right now with everything that is going on in the world, with the worries and the challenges and anxieties and maybe thoughts about the future that arise for us right now more than at any other time. Even more so, we need to remember what we really want is to be here. And so out of habit, we rely on the mind. When there's a lot of reactivity in the nervous system, we rely on the mind. And so recently I was sitting, with what I thought was a decision-making process, right? And yet, remembering that decision arises in presence. And as I was sitting, I would observe a lot of reactivity in my nervous system. My nervous system, after many years of chronic illness, reactivity is present most of the time. However, it was even more reactivity present in the nervous system and in the brain. And as I was sitting, suddenly I saw this thought. These are very subtle happenings, right? I saw this thought that said, I need a decision, or I need to make a decision. And as I was seeing the thought, I realized, no, you see, that's the mind, right? This is the mind. That's how it presents itself. And what I really need is to be here. And of course, in that moment, there is the relaxation into presence, right? And there's also, first of all, the willingness to be here, but then also the recognition, that this is where the movement or the clarity of the movement arises from, right? This is not a movement be decided or that can happen in the mind. And so important to remember that this is really the meaning of it, right? The meaning of it is that in a moment, we really need to put everything aside, right? Even the subtle thoughts, right? Especially the subtle thoughts, because they are so familiar and so compelling, so much, we rely on them so much, right? And rather than following that, to really let oneself remember that what we want is to be here, what we really want is to be here, and let go into presence. So I want to invite you all into a little practice together. Before we do the little inquiry or practice, let's take a moment to sit here, to really notice your surroundings, notice your body, notice the sensations that are present. Also notice that sense of presence that is here. Good, beautiful. And know and remember that when reactivity is present in the nervous system, we have these little, ways of supporting the brain and the nervous system, right? In its ability to be here. So let's take a situation in which you really think you have to do something or know something or be something or accomplish something or figure something out, or just let's take a situation like that, right? And let's allow yourself to remember the thoughts that you have when you are in that moment. I need to fill in the blanks. I need to feel better. I need to get better. I need to do this. I need to make a decision. I need to become, I need to practice more. I need to, whatever, right? I need to awaken, whatever the thoughts are, right? I need to figure out the future so I can do something about it right now, right? Let's remember a situation like that. And as you're remembering that, I want you to tell yourself, what I really want is to be here. What I really want is to be here. Good, beautiful. And notice the change of direction, right? Because there's always that outgoing movement of the mind. This, I want to not to feel this way. I want to this, I want to that. I want to know what to do. I want to, there's always that outgoing movement of the mind. What I really want is to be here. That's an inner movement. That's a movement towards the inner. Just notice that change of direction. Good, beautiful. And just see if you can let yourself be here for a moment, and let go of that sense of responsibility or whatever it is that you think, you need, right? Just, you have the permission to let yourself. Good, beautiful. Just let yourself be here for a moment. And just notice the simplicity of that. And notice the support and the solace and sometimes even information, right? That really comes from here. Good, beautiful. And most of all, when we disconnect from the mind, when we are here, then even if you don't have the clarity in a moment, right? I assure you that as you let yourself rest here, then as you enter again into activity, you have so much more clarity or so much more knowing of which way to move, right? it will be so much more natural. Good, good, beautiful. So just take another moment of resting here. Another moment. This is where everything that we are looking for is, right? Everything you are looking for is already here. So we have a 3-week intensive coming up starting this Sunday. I want to invite you to join me and also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to sign on to our emailing list so that you can receive information about videos and programs and other things directly on your email. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all very soon.